The jungle did not want them there. That was the only way Reed Calloway could describe it. The trees on Verath Prime grew so thick that sunlight never touched the ground. The air smelled of wet soil and something older, something that had no name in any human language. Every step her boots sank into mud that seemed to pull back. Every scan her equipment ran returned data that made no sense until it suddenly made too much sense all at once. She had been digging here for 11 days. Reed was not a soldier. She was not a pilot or a diplomat. She was a xenoarchaeologist, which meant she spent most of her life covered in dirt, arguing with universities about funding and being quietly ignored by the Galactic Concord, which considered human scientists about as relevant as students on a field trip. She had short, dark hair, a jacket with too many pockets, and a habit of talking to herself when things got interesting. Things were getting very interesting. Her team was small, 4 people plus herself. Dario ran the ground-penetrating scanner. Lena handled biological samples. Oren was the structural engineer, quiet and precise. Weez managed communications, and when he had time, made coffee that kept everyone alive. They had set up camp 2 kilometers from the ruins, which was not far enough to feel safe, but far enough to sleep without hearing the jungle breathe. The structure had shown up on day 3. Dario had been running a routine subsurface scan when the equipment nearly shut itself off from data overload. Beneath the root systems and rock, at a depth of 40 meters, something vast and geometric waited in the dark. Perfectly shaped walls, sealed corridors, and most strangely, a heat signature, not geological heat, controlled heat, even steady, artificial. Something down, there was still running. Reed had filed the discovery with Galactic Concord Command the same afternoon. The response came back in 6 hours, which was fast for bureaucrats who lived 3-star systems away. The message was short. Cease all excavation activity immediately. Planet Verath Prime carries a Class 9 hazard designation. All teams are directed to withdraw to orbit and await further instruction. Reed had read the message twice. Then she had asked Weez to confirm receipt and file the Exploration Accord's standard 72-hour review window, which gave her team the legal right to continue non-invasive study before any halt order took effect. Weez had looked at her like she was dangerous. She had smiled and gone back to the dig. By day 9, they had cleared a path down through 40 meters of earth and old stone, following a sealed shaft that had been deliberately constructed, not carved by time or nature. The walls of the shaft were smooth. The material was not any mineral they recognized. It did not corrode. It did not scratch. When Oren pressed his palm flat against it, he said it felt warm, like skin. On day 10, a Galactic Concord observation vessel appeared in orbit. Its commander identified himself as Counselor Dreth, a senior Concord representative of the Drevathi species, old and reptilian and very unhappy. He opened a channel to read directly. "Dr. Calloway," he said. His voice was low and careful, like someone speaking around a fear they had decided not to show. "You will stop. This is not a request. You do not understand what you are beneath." "I understand there is a structure," Reed said. "I understand it is still drawing power. I understand the Concord flagged this planet with no explanation beyond a hazard code. I have 41 hours left in my review window, Counselor." "The window does not apply here." "I filed it correctly. The Accord says otherwise." Silence, long enough that Reed thought he had cut the channel. "Dr. Calloway," his voice was different now, quieter. "I am asking you, please, take your people and go up." Reed looked at the shaft. She looked at the sealed door at the bottom of it, 6 meters tall and covered in carvings neither she nor anyone on her team could read. She looked at the heat readings on her scanner, steady and patient as a heartbeat. "What is down there, Counselor?" He did not answer. Reed ended the call. On day 11, Oren found the release mechanism. It was not a button or a panel. It was a sequence of pressure points built into the door's carved surface, subtle enough that 10,000 years of waiting had not worn them down. He walked Reed through it slowly, 7 contact points. A specific order. The door had not been built to keep people out. It had been built to make sure only patient, careful hands could open it. They pressed the final point together. The seal broke with a sound like a long breath held and finally released. Warm air rolled out of the darkness beyond and moved past them in a steady, slow current, carrying a smell that was not rot and was not chemical but was alive somehow, old and alive and waiting. The corridor beyond was enormous. The ceiling rose 8 meters above their heads. The walls were the same smooth, warm material as the shaft. The floor was clean, not dusty, not covered in debris, clean as though someone had swept it last week. Reed switched on her lamp and pointed it down the corridor. Deep in the dark, at the far edge of the light's reach, something shifted. She did not run. She stood very still, slowed her breathing, and reached into her jacket pocket for her field recorder. "Day 11, she said quietly. "The structure is open, it is warm, it is clean, and we are not alone in it." She clicked the recorder off and took one step forward. The corridor went on for 300 meters before it opened into something that had no right to exist underground. Reed stood at the entrance and did not speak for a full minute. None of her team did. The chamber was the size of an arena. The ceiling arched overhead in a dome shape, carved with lines and symbols that caught the light from Reed's lamp and scattered it in patterns across the walls. Along the curved edges of the chamber, set into the stone at regular intervals, were doors, not the massive sealed kind they had come through, smaller, each one about 4 meters tall. Each one with a faint glow around its edges, a soft pulse of pale light that moved slowly, like something breathing. Dario counted them quietly. 47 doors, he said. Reed walked to the nearest one. Through a narrow, transparent panel set into its center, she could see darkness inside. She held her scanner up. Cold, no heat, no signal. She moved to the next. Cold, the next. Cold. She moved around the chamber methodically, one by one, Lena beside her recording everything, Oren mapping the floor plan, we staying near the entrance with his hand near his radio. 39 doors were cold and dark. Then Reed reached the 40th, and the scanner jumped. Heat steady, even controlled. She pressed her face close to the transparent panel. Inside, in the glow of the door's own ambient light, she could see the outline of something large, round, smooth, sitting still in the center of a small chamber lined with what looked like woven material, dark gold in color, still intact after 10,000 years. An egg. She checked the next door, heat, glow. Another egg, this one larger, its surface a faint silver color. The next, heat, violet, almost luminescent. The next, ivory. The last warm door held one that was deep ocean blue, the color of water at the bottom of something very far down. 5 eggs, 5 chambers still alive, 42 dead. Reed filed the report to Counselor Dreth's ship before she said a word to her team. The response came in 4 minutes. Not a call this time, a data package. Large, the kind of file transfer that meant someone had been waiting to send it and had spent a long time deciding whether to. Reed opened it. The Galactic Concord archive on Verath Prime went back 9,800 years. Most of it was flagged classified at a level Reed's clearance should not have unlocked, but Dreth had opened it manually from his end. She read it standing in the middle of the chamber, her team quiet around her, the 5 warm doors glowing in the dark. 9,800 years ago, an empire called the Verath had found a smaller version of this structure on a different planet, also classified, also sealed. They had not waited. They had not been careful. They had brought in a fleet and machinery, and they had forced the doors open in a matter of hours. Inside, they found 7 eggs. They had taken them, alive. The plan was study first, then use. A species capable of what the Verath were capable of, harnessed, would have changed the balance of power in the entire Concord. The eggs had hatched during transit. The hatchlings were less than 2 days old when they destroyed the first ship. They had not been attacked. They had not been provoked. They had simply emerged into a space full of strangers and cages and fear, and they had responded the only way any living thing responds, when it wakes up afraid and alone and surrounded. 7 hatchlings, 2 days old, 200 Verath warships. The Verath no longer existed as an independent civilization. The Concord Standing Protocol, issued after the incident and never once revised, was simple. If any sealed Verath structure was ever opened again, do not engage. Withdraw all ships to a minimum safe distance. Quarantine the star system. Do not send signals into the structure. Do not send people into the structure. Wait for the hatchlings to leave on their own, or, if they did not leave, to die. Under no circumstances attempt contact of any kind. Reed finished reading. She stood still for a moment. We broke the silence. We need to go back up. The eggs haven't hatched yet, Reed said. They will. Not immediately. The stasis is still active on some of them. We have time. Time to do what? Lena asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were moving between the glowing doors and the exit. Reed did not answer right away. She was looking at the chamber, at the carvings on the ceiling, at the way the corridor they had come through was exactly wide enough for something very large to walk down comfortably, at the way the egg chambers were arranged not like storage, but like rooms, like a place where something was meant to wake up and be safe. Her radio crackled. Admiral Sova's voice came through from the human fleet in orbit. Reed, I've read the file. I'm moving our ships back to the Concord's recommended distance. I need you to come up. How many human ships do we have? 4 frigates and the survey carrier. Move them back, that's fine. I said I need you to come up. Reed looked at the blue egg. Through the panel it glowed very softly, like light seen from underwater. I'm staying, Sova. A pause, the protocol says. The protocol was written by people who went in with cages and a fleet. That's not what we did. Another pause, longer. Sova was a careful man. He had not gotten to Admiral by being reckless, but he had also not gotten there by not understanding people. I can't protect you from in here, Reed said, but I don't think you can protect me from out there either, so let me try it this way. The line stayed open for a long time. Dario, Lena, Oren, Wheeze, Sova said at last. You are ordered back to the surface camp and then to orbit. Reed, you are officially noted as acting against direct recommendation. Her team looked at her. She gave them a nod. They went. Reed sat down on the floor of the chamber, cross-legged, facing the 5 warm doors. She reached into her jacket and took out a ration bar, broke it in half, and ate one piece slowly. Somewhere behind the gold door, a faint sound started, low and continuous, not a crack, not yet. A hum. Reed listened to it for a while. Then she hummed back. The gold door cracked at dawn. Reed knew it was dawn only because her watch said so. There was no sunlight 40 meters underground, only the steady glow of 5 warm chambers, and the lamp she had dimmed to its lowest setting so the light would not be harsh. She had not slept. She had sat against the far wall of the chamber, close enough to watch the doors, far enough to not be crowding them, and she had spent the hours cataloging every sound the structure made. The hum had changed around midnight. It had gotten lower and more complex, like 2 notes instead of 1. By 3 in the morning, it was 5 distinct sounds coming from 5 distinct doors, each slightly different in pitch and rhythm, overlapping into something that was not quite music, but was not random either. Reed had recorded all of it. When the gold door began to crack, the hum from that chamber stopped. The others continued. Reed stood up slowly, brushed the dust from her jacket, and stayed where she was. The crack started at the top and moved down in a jagged line, then another, then several at once, fine and branching like ice under pressure. A piece of the shell fell to the floor of the chamber with a dry sound, then a larger piece, then a long pause in which nothing happened at all, and Reed held her breath without meaning to. A claw came through first. It was gold, the same color as the shell, 4-fingered and scaled, and as long as Reed's entire arm. It curled once, gripping the edge of the broken shell, and then the rest of the hatchling came through in a controlled motion, pushing the remaining shell aside like someone opening a door they had been waiting a long time to open. It was the size of a draft horse, maybe larger. Its wings were folded tight against its back, still damp from the inside of the shell. Its neck was long and held in a curve, head down slightly, eyes adjusting to the dim light. Those eyes were amber-colored, large, and currently fixed directly on Reed. Reed did not move. She did not back up. She did not raise her hands or her scanner or her radio. She looked back. The hatchling breathed in through its nose, a long, slow inhale, and Reed watched its ribcage expand to an extraordinary size and then contract. It was reading the air, cataloging her, deciding. It took one step forward. Reed held still. It took another. When it was close enough that Reed could see her own reflection in one amber eye, it stopped, lowered its head to her level, and simply looked at her face. Reed said very quietly, "Hello." The hatchling blinked. Over the next 6 hours, the other 4 eggs opened. The silver one was the second. Quieter, more deliberate, it pushed its way out with almost no sound and then sat at the edge of its chamber for a long time before entering the main space. The violet one came out quickly and immediately began investigating the walls, pressing its nose against the carvings. The ivory one managed to trip over its own feet twice within the first 10 minutes and then seemed entirely unbothered by this. The deep ocean blue one did not come out for 3 hours after its shell broke, and when it finally emerged, it stayed close to its door and watched everything with cautious eyes. Reed moved slowly. She sat when they sat. She stood when they stood. She let them come to her rather than approaching them. She narrated everything to her field recorder in a voice low enough not to startle anything. The silver one discovered the recorder first. It pressed one long snout against it, and the sound it made vibrated Reed's whole hand. She clicked the recorder off, and the hatchling pulled back, surprised. She clicked it on again. It leaned in again. She clicked it off. The hatchling made a sharp sound that, if Reed had to name it, she would have called impatient. She left the recorder on. In orbit, Counselor Dreth was watching via the helmet camera Reed had left propped on her pack. He had not spoken in over 2 hours. His aide had brought him something to drink, and he had not touched it. The feed showed 5 juvenile Verath moving around a single human woman who was sitting on a stone floor, eating half a ration bar, and occasionally making sounds back at them. "She is still alive," his aide said, "not for the first time." "I can see that," Dreth said. "The gold one has not left her side for 4 hours." Dreth did not answer. The gold hatchling had, in fact, not left Reed's side at all. It had moved with her, sat near her, and at one point had lowered its head onto her lap with a weight that could have crushed her, and had then gone very still. Reed had sat absolutely rigid for about 30 seconds, and then carefully put her hand on the side of its jaw. The hatchling exhaled slowly through its nose. Reed felt the air move across her arm like a warm wind. She kept her hand where it was. Around the 3rd hour, the silver hatchling began to make sounds again, not the construction sounds of the eggs cracking open, something more structured. Reed's earpiece, running a passive translation sweep, caught nothing, no match to any known language in its library. Reed listened to the sound pattern for a while. Then she made a sound back, a rough approximation. She had no idea what she was saying. She might have been saying nothing at all or something terrible, but the silver hatchling paused, turned its head at an angle, and made a different sound. Lower. Reed tried that one too. The hatchling made another. Reed repeated it. They went back and forth like that for 20 minutes. Admiral Sova's log for that evening was 3 lines long. 1900 hours. All 5 hatchlings confirmed active and healthy. Dr. Calloway is unharmed. I have no idea what she is doing, but it appears to be working. Recommend we send her more ration bars. When Reed finally slept, somewhere past midnight of the 2nd day, she did not plan to. She had been sitting against the wall, recorder running. Watching the blue hatchling slowly get closer to her over the course of 2 hours, in movements so small they were almost invisible. She simply closed her eyes for a moment and did not open them again for 6 hours. The 5 hatchlings arranged themselves around her while she slept. The gold one remained closest. The blue one, finally, came near enough to press its chin to the floor 2 feet from her hand. Dreth watched the feed until his aide made him go to bed. In the morning, the Galactic Concord classified Reed Calloway as a potential extinction-level contact event. Reed updated her mission log, before she even stood up. Day 2, making progress. The emergency session of the Galactic Concord opened at precisely the wrong moment. The feed from Reed's helmet camera was being broadcast live to the chamber because Councillor Dreth had made the mistake of sharing it with the session moderator as evidence of the situation's severity, and the moderator had put it on the main display without thinking. So the 230 representatives of the Concord's member species gathered to debate the most dangerous first contact event in recorded history were watching a human woman teach a juvenile Verath dragon to catch a small rock she was tossing, while 4 other ancient apex predators watched with what appeared to be increasing interest. The session lasted 6 hours. It was not productive. The Drevathi delegation, Dreth's own people, spoke first. Their argument was structured and alarming. The Verath species, even as hatchlings, carried the biological capacity for planetary-level destruction. This was documented. The bond that appeared to be forming between the hatchlings and Dr. Calloway was also documented, specifically in the archival records of the Verath incident, though that bond had formed under entirely different and catastrophically worse circumstances. If the hatchlings imprinted on a human, the implications for galactic order were significant. Humans were junior members of the Concord. They had been spacefaring for barely 300 years. They had not demonstrated the judgment necessary to manage a relationship with the Verath. The Osani delegation did not argue with the Drevathi on the facts. They argued on the premise. The problem was not the hatchlings bonding with a human. The problem was that humanity had been given exploration rights in the first place. 40 years ago, the Concord had voted to admit humanity as a provisional member. This was clearly an error. No species with sufficient sense would have entered that structure. No species with proper respect for Concord Protocol would have ignored a Class 9 hazard flag and a direct withdrawal order. The humans had done both, and now 5 of the most dangerous organisms ever recorded were awake and apparently playing catch with one of them. The human ambassador, a tall woman named Reyes, who had been sitting quietly through both speeches, stood up. She said that Dr. Calloway had not violated any law. She said the 72-hour review window had been filed correctly and Concord Legal had confirmed its validity. She said Reed was not in distress, had not requested extraction, and had in fact specifically requested that the fleet maintain radio silence during certain hours because the violet hatchling had developed an aversion to certain transmission frequencies. The violet hatchling detail caused a 20-minute recess, while 3 separate delegations conferred with their science advisors. Ambassador Reyes used the recess to send Reed a brief message. It said, "They are arguing about you. How are you?" Reed's response came back in 10 minutes. She had apparently been busy. The message said, "Fine. The gold one figured out how to open my pack and ate my emergency beacon. Not a problem, I have a spare. The ivory one keeps stealing my scanner. I have started hiding it in my boot. Send a xenolinguist if you can. I think the silver one is trying to teach me something specific and I keep getting it wrong. Also more socks. The floor is cold." Reyes read this message to the full session when the recess ended. The silence that followed was different from the silence before, harder to categorize. The Drevathi delegate asked if Dr. Calloway was aware that she was in a potentially fatal situation. Reyes said she assumed so, yes. The delegate asked why she was asking for socks. Reyes said she could not speak to Reed's internal experience, but that Reed had been a field researcher for 15 years and probably considered this a normal Tuesday. The session voted on a motion to remove Reed by force, 14 in favor, 3 against. The motion required a 2/3 majority and failed. It also failed practically, as the Yosani delegate pointed out during the counting, because removing Reed by force would leave 5 juvenile Verath dragons alone in a structure they had just woken up in, without the only living thing they had known since birth. And the historical record suggested rather strongly that this would not end well for whoever was responsible. The motion was withdrawn and not filed again. In the nursery, Reed had no idea the vote had happened. She was working. The silver hatchlings' teaching attempts had been going on for 3 days by this point, and Reed had started to build a rough map of the sound system. It was not like any language she knew. It was tonal in the way some human languages were tonal, but more so, with layered harmonics that carried meaning on top of meaning. Her voice could not replicate it precisely. Her earpiece could not translate it, but she had begun to identify repeating patterns. One pattern appeared every time the silver hatchling looked at the carvings on the walls. One appeared when the hatchlings interacted with each other and seemed to be establishing something, an order, a hierarchy, she was not sure. One appeared, most often from the gold one, whenever it pressed close to Reed. She did not know what that last one meant yet. She wrote everything down in her field notebook, the physical one she carried in her inside pocket, because she did not entirely trust battery life underground. She had filled 30 pages. Orin sent her a care package via a small remote supply drone that Sova had cleared as non-threatening, meaning it was slow, unarmed, and painted the least alarming color they had, which turned out to be a pale green. The hatchlings had watched it arrive with great interest, and the ivory one had immediately knocked it over. The package contained 2 pairs of thick socks, 6 days of ration bars, a fresh recorder, 3 spare data chips, a note from Lena with updated biological scan data pulled from the ambient sensors Reed had placed, a note from Dario that was mostly questions, a note from Wheeze that just said please come back eventually, and a printed copy of a message from Counselor Dreth. Reed read Dreth's message last. It said, I have watched this feed for 4 days. I do not understand what you are doing. I am not certain it is survivable. I am less certain that stopping it is survivable. I have filed a formal request for a xenolinguist and a biologist to be cleared for surface delivery. They will arrive in 6 days. Try not to let any of them eat the emergency beacon. Reed folded the note and put it in her jacket pocket. She sat back down on the floor. The gold hatchling came to sit beside her immediately, the way it always did, as though it had been waiting for her to be still again. She put her hand against the side of its jaw without thinking. The sound it made was the same one she still did not have a translation for. She was starting to think that maybe she did not need one. The xenolinguist's name was Farhan, and he lasted 40 minutes in the nursery before the gold hatchling decided it did not like his data tablet and sat on it. He adapted quickly after that. Farhan had spent his career working on dead languages, things found on stone tablets and buried cities, nothing that could look back at him with amber eyes. But he was precise, and he was careful, and most importantly, he listened well, which was what Reed had needed for weeks. He sat beside her on the floor, and she walked him through 30 pages of field notes and 2 months of recordings, and he went very quiet in the way people went quiet when they were reorganizing everything they knew. The biologist was named Petra. She moved around the edges of the chamber slowly, running passive scans with equipment small enough not to alarm the hatchlings, and within 3 days had established that the 5 of them were healthy, growing faster than any model had predicted, and that the ivory one was somehow still in possession of Reed's scanner despite Reed having hidden it in increasingly creative locations. Progress came from an unexpected direction. Petra noticed that the carvings on the chamber walls were not decorative, not primarily. Some of them matched structures in the hatchlings' physical anatomy, specifically in the resonating chambers in their throats that produced the layered tonal sounds. The carvings were not art. They were instruction. Each symbol corresponded to a specific harmonic combination. The walls were a language primer written for the hatchlings themselves. Farhan nearly dropped his replacement tablet when Petra showed him. They spent 2 weeks cross-referencing the wall carvings against Reed's recordings. Slowly, then faster, the structure of the Verath language emerged, not the full complexity of it that would take years, but the base layer, the foundational sounds and what they meant. Reed was the one who found the archive. She had been exploring the far end of the chamber, past the egg doors, where a narrow corridor led to a sealed room she had not tried to enter before out of caution. With the hatchlings calmer now, more settled, she felt more comfortable moving through the structure. She brought the gold one with her because it followed her regardless, and the blue one came along at a distance, as it usually did. The room behind the corridor had no eggs, no chambers, nothing biological. It was lined from floor to ceiling with inscribed panels, thousands of them, each covered in dense Verath script. The material was the same as the walls throughout. Whatever process had kept it intact for 10,000 years had kept this room too. Farhan stood in the doorway and said nothing for a long time. They called it the archive, for lack of a better word. It took 3 more weeks to begin making sense of it, working from the base language layer, cross-referencing patterns, using the gold hatchlings' occasional corrections, because it had begun to respond when their interpretations were wrong in a very specific way. A short, sharp sound that Farhan eventually classified as the Verath equivalent of no. The story came together in pieces. The Verath had seen it coming, not immediately, not with time to spare, but enough time to act. A cascade failure in their star system, natural in origin, unstoppable, would over the course of approximately 300 years render their home planet uninhabitable. They had known. They had spent those 300 years deciding what to survive. Not buildings, not weapons, not technology, though the geothermal power system still running after 10 millennia was proof enough they had been extraordinary engineers. What they had chosen to survive was themselves, their young, their memory. The nurseries, plural, had been seeded across 12 different planets. Reed's team had found one. The archive suggested the others existed, but gave no locations. Whether any others had survived, whether any others had ever been found, was not recorded here. The seal mechanism was the detail that stopped everyone cold. Farhan translated it carefully and then read it back 3 times to make sure he had it right. The outer seal of the nursery was not locked against entry. It was locked against a specific kind of entry. It used pressure sensors and atmospheric readers and something more subtle, a biological resonance system that Petra eventually identified as responding to stress hormones. Species that arrived in fear, aggression, or predatory focus would trigger a secondary lock that would seal the structure for another 1,000 years. Species that arrived calmly, stayed calmly, and waited without force would not trigger it. Every species that had found this planet in 10,000 years, 7 documented, had triggered the secondary lock. Either they had come in aggressive or they had panicked when they hit the hazard classification and fled. The Concord's own withdrawal order would have triggered it. 41 hours more of waiting, and the nursery would have sealed itself again. Reed had entered it in hour 40 of the review window. Dreth received this information on a Tuesday. He sat with it for a very long time. When he responded, he did not send a message. He requested a direct channel and spoke quietly for about 10 minutes, and at the end he said, in a voice that was as close to humble as Reed had ever heard from him, "Your people stumbled into this by accident." "Most things humans find, we find by accident," Reed said. "That is not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be." In the archive, near the very end of the inscribed panels, past 10,000 years of history and science and cultural record and grief and hope, there was a single passage that Farhan translated last. He did it alone, and then came to find Reed in the main chamber, where she was sitting with all 5 hatchlings around her, the gold one pressed against her side, the blue one finally close enough to touch. He handed her the translation on a piece of paper. She read it. It said, "We do not know who will find this. We do not know what shape they will take or what voice they will speak in. We know only that the ones who open this door will have waited. They will have been calm. They will not have come to take. To whoever you are, these are our children. We could not stay. Please do not let them be alone." Reed sat with that for a while. Then the gold one made the sound she still did not have a word for, the one it made when she was still, and it was close to her. She asked Farhan that evening if he had a translation for it yet. He said he thought so. He thought it was close to something like, "You stayed." Reed folded the paper and put it in her inside pocket, next to Dreth's first note. She did not say anything. She did not need to. 4 months after Reed Calloway had sat down on a stone floor with half a ration bar, The hatchlings were not hatchlings anymore. The gold one's head now reached the top of the corridor entrance. The ivory one had knocked over the supply drone 3 more times, not by accident. The blue one, which had spent its first weeks in cautious stillness, had developed a habit of lying across the main chamber entrance like a very large and extremely inconvenient door. The violet one had memorized every carving in the nursery and could reproduce any of them in sound with perfect accuracy. The silver one had, at some point, quietly learned to open every sealed container on the premises. They were not children anymore. They were not quite adults by the Verath archives measure, but they were close. Reed knew it before they did, or maybe they all knew it at the same time, the way you know a season is ending not because something announces it, but because the air shifts and you feel it in your chest. She told Admiral Sova on a Wednesday, just said it plainly, they're going to leave soon. Sova said he would make arrangements. The Galactic Concord sent a formal delegation for the departure. 12 ships in a loose orbit, no weapons hot, everyone in dress uniforms because someone on the protocol committee had decided that was appropriate and nobody had argued with enough conviction to stop it. Councillor Dreth was there. Ambassador Reyes was there. Representatives from 9 species, all watching a feed from Reed's helmet camera as she stood at the entrance to the nursery on the surface of Verath Prime for the first time in 4 months, blinking in the actual sunlight. The 5 dragons came up through the structure one at a time and spread into the jungle clearing around her. In the open air, they were different, larger somehow, though the measurements had not changed. When the gold one spread its wings for the first time in full, the downdraft knocked Reed back a step and flattened the grass in a circle 30 meters wide. The silver one rolled its neck, and the sound that came out resonated in Reed's sternum like a struck bell. The blue one looked at the sky for a long time, very still, and then made a sound Reed recognized from the archive as something that translated roughly as, "There it is." The Concord delegation was very quiet. The gold one turned from the sky to Reed. It lowered its head to her level, which now required a significant bow of its neck. Reed reached up and put her hand on its jaw the way she always had. The weight of just its head was enough to lift her heels off the ground slightly, but she had learned to brace for it. It made the sound, the one Farhan had translated as you stayed. Reed said, in the rough tonal approximation she had spent 4 months building, something that she hoped translated to, of course. Then the gold one straightened up, and in front of the assembled Concord delegation, in a formal tonal address that Farhan translated in real time from the orbit feed, it spoke. It did not speak long. The Verath were not a species that used many words when few would do. It said, the Verath are not gone, we are the Verath. We know what we are and where we come from because we were given time to learn it. We will rebuild what was lost. We do not join your Concord. We are not a member species. We are a sovereign people and we will be treated as such. It paused. It said, there is one people we recognize, one people we name as ally, not because they are powerful, not because they are old, because when every other species either ran or came to take, one of them sat down on the floor and waited to say hello. The Concord delegation processed this in silence. Dreth, to his credit, straightened his collar and formally acknowledged the statement on record. His face had the expression of someone doing the hardest right thing they had ever done and doing it correctly. Ambassador Reyes, on the same feed, was visibly trying not to smile. The 5 dragons launched together. The sound and wind of it brought down 3 of the camp's sensor poles, and Reed had to grab her hat. She stood in the clearing and watched them rise through the cloud layer until they were small, and then until they were not there at all, and then until there was only sky. The clearing was very quiet afterward. Reed's radio crackled, Sova's voice. They're on long-range sensors, moving toward the outer system. Good, Reed said. The Concord would like a full debrief. I know. Dreth filed a formal statement. He said, and I am reading this directly, that he would like it noted for the record that he told you to leave and you did not listen, and that this appears to have been the correct outcome, and that he finds this profoundly irritating. Reed laughed. It echoed across the empty clearing. She stood there a while longer. The jungle of Verath Prime breathed around her, wet and old and alive. Somewhere deep in the structure below, 5 empty chambers still glowed faintly with the warmth that had kept them lit for 10,000 years, and would probably keep glowing for a while yet, because whatever the Verath had built, they had built it to last. Reed pulled out her field notebook and wrote the final entry for the mission. Day 118. All 5 departed safely, structure intact, archive fully recorded and transmitted, no casualties, no incidents beyond standard equipment loss, notably 1 emergency beacon, 1 scanner, and 2 pairs of socks. She stopped, thought for a moment, then added, methodology note for future reference. When you find something old and sealed and frightening, don't come with weapons, don't come with cages, don't come loud, sit down, be still, wait as long as it takes. Be the kind of thing that something ancient and alone would want to wake up to. That is the whole of it. She closed the notebook and put it in her inside pocket. Then she picked up her pack, checked that her spare beacon was still there, and walked back through the jungle toward the landing pad and whatever came next. Behind her, the nursery breathed on in the dark and said nothing, and had already said everything.